Nathan had always believed in hard work and sacrifice for the ones he loved. When he married Emily, he thought the same principles applied, both of them building a life together, making sacrifices, and reaching for success hand in hand. Nathan, at 32, was practical, grounded, and sometimes, perhaps, too trusting. It had been his idea for Emily to go back to school. She had dreams of becoming an architect, and despite the financial strain it would cause, he had been determined to help her achieve them. So Nathan worked long hours at the office, often late into the night, pushing himself harder than ever before. He had been proud to pay for her tuition, the textbooks, the supplies, the kind of support that, to him, seemed to come with an unspoken promise of loyalty. The idea of Emily achieving her dreams with his help filled him with a quiet sense of pride. He didn't expect her to repay him directly. He didn't need grand gestures, but he did expect trust, respect, at the very least, faithfulness. One evening, after another exhausting day at the office, Nathan arrived home to the warm glow of their kitchen. Emily was sitting at the counter, scrolling through her phone as usual, her auburn hair cascading down her shoulders. She looked up and smiled, a smile that used to make him feel loved. But tonight, something felt off. Something he couldn't quite place. "How was your day?" Emily asked, her voice light, but there was a certain distance in her eyes. "Busy, the usual," Nathan replied, hanging up his jacket and slipping off his shoes. He was tired, but he could never shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It had been building for weeks. Subtle shifts in Emily's behavior, less conversation at dinner, more late nights, studying, and her excuses growing thinner by the day. He had dismissed it at first, figured it was just the stress of school, but tonight, something gnawed at him. Something sharp that told him to pay closer attention. Nathan poured himself a glass of water and then noticed the phone. She was texting again. It wasn't a rare sight. Emily often did so when she wasn't busy with schoolwork, keeping in touch with friends or colleagues, but tonight the way she quickly swiped her phone screen down, hiding whatever message she was reading, caught his attention. He didn't say anything. He never liked to pry, but a sudden unease spread through him. This time, the instinct to look was too strong to ignore. "Hey, you mind if I borrow your phone for a second?" Nathan asked casually, moving to sit across from her at the counter. "I need to check the bank account for something." Emily's fingers froze on the screen. She hesitated, then smiled a little too brightly. "Sure, but it's all set up for autopay." Nothing new there. Nathan didn't press it. He had no reason to be suspicious until he saw the name in her messages. The name alone didn't bother him. Emily had plenty of male friends. But as Nathan glanced over, the context of their messages quickly became clear. It wasn't just casual. It was intimate, flirtatious, the kind of thing he had never seen from Emily, at least not with anyone else. "Are you sure Nathan won't mind if we meet again? I can't stop thinking about you." His heart dropped into his stomach. He read the message over and over, his mind trying to process what he was seeing, trying to deny it. Could this be a mistake? Maybe they were just friends. But it wasn't just one message, it was a string of them. The content was clear, and the more he read, the more his pulse quickened. Emily was cheating. The anger that flooded him wasn't immediate. First came the shock, the feeling of disbelief. This couldn't be real, right? Emily, the woman he had been supporting for the past 2 years, the woman who had promised him that their future together would be one of shared dreams, was betraying him with another man. Nathan felt the sting in his chest like a wound that was still fresh, though it had only just opened. He didn't confront her then, not yet. Instead, he turned his attention to the phone and read more, delving into the conversation between Emily and Daniel. Each message revealed a little more of their deceitful secret world. His sacrifices for her education, his late nights working overtime. All seemed to have meant nothing. But Nathan wasn't the type to rush into a confrontation without a plan. If Emily thought she could get away with this, she was wrong. And he would make sure she paid the price, not just emotionally, but financially as well. The seeds of his revenge were already starting to take root. But first, he needed more evidence. Nathan's heart was a turbulent sea of emotions, but he knew better than to let them control him. He was not the kind of man who acted out of impulse or frustration, especially not when his entire world seemed to be falling apart. Emily had betrayed him, not just emotionally, but in the deepest way possible, and he was going to make sure she understood the weight That night, as he sat alone in their dimly lit living room, the phone still resting on the coffee table in front of him, Nathan's thoughts turned cold. He couldn't confront her yet. Not until he had solid proof. Not just the text messages that she could easily deny, but something far more damning, something that would make her see the full impact of her betrayal. The next few days were filled with quiet determination. Nathan began to take careful note of everything: Emily's schedule, her behavior, her increasingly erratic excuses. She was spending more time away from home, claiming she needed extra hours at the library for her thesis work. Sometimes she wouldn't come home until late, citing study groups or group projects. She'd forgotten little details about her study sessions, who was there, what they were working on, and that inconsistency gnawed at him, fueling his growing sense. But it wasn't just her words he was tracking, it was the finances too. Emily had always been good at keeping things organized when it came to their shared bank account. Nathan rarely thought about money, trusting that they were both contributing to the household in their own ways. Emily's tuition fees were steep, but Nathan didn't mind. It was part of their plan for her future, his way of helping her achieve her dreams. However, now that the veil of trust had been torn away, Nathan started to dig deeper into the account. One afternoon, while Emily was out, he sat at the kitchen table, his laptop open in front of him. He logged into their joint account and began scrolling through the recent transactions. At first, it seemed like everything was normal, but as he moved down the list, something caught his eye: an unfamiliar payment made in the early hours of the morning, a transfer of a substantial amount of money. It wasn't the first time he had noticed these small payments, but this one was different. The recipient's name was unfamiliar: Daniel. Nathan's fingers hovered over the keyboard as a sick feeling twisted in his gut. It couldn't be him. It had to be a coincidence. But when he searched through past statements, there were more payments, some large, some small, all to the same account. It didn't take long to realize that Emily had been paying Daniel for some time now, money that Nathan had worked tirelessly to earn. The realization hit him like a punch to the chest. Emily had not only been unfaithful to him emotionally, she had been using his money to fund her affair. She had found a way to weave her lies into the fabric of their lives so seamlessly that Nathan hadn't even suspected it. She had played him for a fool. There was no turning back now. The rage that had simmered quietly inside him for days began to bubble to the surface. But Nathan wasn't one to act rashly. No, he needed to expose her in a way that would leave no room for denial or manipulation. The world she had so carefully built around her, her charm, her image of the perfect, hardworking wife, would crumble in an instant once the truth was revealed, and he would be the one to tear it all down. The following weekend, Nathan decided to pay a visit to Emily's family. He hadn't seen much of them lately, and he hadn't planned on bringing up the affair. But now, the idea seemed like the perfect way to execute his revenge. Emily's family had always adored her. She was their golden girl, the one they saw as ambitious, talented, and full of potential. Nathan had always been the quiet, supportive husband in their eyes, but this time, he would be the one to reveal the truth. Nathan's plan was simple: expose Emily in front of her family and let them see her for what she truly was. He was prepared to bring every piece of evidence he had gathered: the text messages, the bank statements, and even the recordings of the conversations between Emily and Daniel. No longer would Emily be able to manipulate her image and play the victim. The truth would stand in stark contrast to the carefully constructed facade she had worked so hard to maintain. And the day of the family gathering arrived, and Nathan felt a strange sense of calm. His anger had settled into something more controlled, more focused. He had already decided that this was the right course of action. He wasn't doing this out of petty revenge, no. This was about justice, about showing Emily that her lies and manipulation would no longer work, and that her actions had consequences. As they sat down for dinner with her parents, Nathan could see the warmth in their eyes as they chatted, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. Emily was her usual charming self, laughing and recounting stories of her hard work at school. Nathan could hardly stomach her words, knowing full well that she was using his sacrifices for her own selfish gain. He waited for the perfect moment. After dessert, when the conversation had turned to lighter topics, Nathan stood up. He had planned every word, every move with precision. Emily looked up, startled, as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a USB drive. He placed it on the table with a soft thud. "I think it's time you all knew the truth," Nathan said, his voice steady. He could feel the weight of the moment. the eyes of her family on him, waiting for what he would say next. Emily's face drained of color, her charming smile faltered as she caught sight of the drive. "What are you doing, Nathan?" she asked, her voice a mix of confusion and panic. Nathan didn't answer right away. Instead, he clicked the USB drive into the family computer and began to play the recordings. Emily's text messages, the incriminating bank transfers, her lies. He watched as her parents' expressions shifted from casual curiosity to shock, then disbelief. They couldn't hide their reactions as the truth hit them. Emily's lies were laid bare before them. She couldn't talk her way out of this. As the final recording played, Nathan turned to Emily, his eyes cold. "This is what you've done, Emily. This is who you are." The room was silent, the air thick with the weight of betrayal, and Nathan, for the first time in what felt like forever, felt a flicker of satisfaction. The game was over. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that fills every corner, suffocating all the space between people. Emily's family sat frozen, their eyes wide in shock as Nathan's words sank in. The text messages, the bank transfers, the recordings, they all painted the same image. Emily's betrayal, laid bare in the coldest of lights. Nathan stood there, his posture straight, his heart pounding, but there was no doubt in his mind. This was the moment. This was the reckoning. Emily's hand trembled as she reached for the glass of wine in front of her, the crimson liquid swaying dangerously. She had been poised, charming, a picture of confidence just moments ago. Now, she seemed like a puppet with its strings cut. The facade that had been so carefully constructed for years was crumbling, piece by piece, and all Nathan could feel was a strange mixture of anger, relief, and her father's voice broke the stillness. His tone was soft, but there was a hardness to it that Nathan had never heard before. Mr. Roberts had always adored his daughter, even more than Nathan had ever expected. He had praised her accomplishments, showered her with praise for being the perfect wife and student. But now, as the truth came out, Nathan saw the cracks in that picture-perfect image. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice thick with disbelief. Emily's lips parted as if she were about to speak, but the words seemed to get stuck in her throat. She swallowed, trying to steady herself, but there was no denying the weight of the evidence in front of her. She looked at Nathan, her eyes wild with panic, but he didn't flinch. There was no trace of the love and trust he had once had for her in his expression. He was beyond that now. This isn't what it looks like," Emily finally managed, her voice shaky but with an underlying defensive edge. She shot a desperate glance at her mother, who was sitting with her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Dad, Mom, it's not, I can explain," but her words had no power. They didn't resonate anymore. Nathan could see the anger starting to flash in her family's eyes, first from her father, then from her mother, and her older brother, Ben, who had been sitting quietly throughout the dinner. Ben wasn't one for confrontation, but even he couldn't look away from the screen now, his face darkening with each new revelation. "These explain," her father said, his voice growing harder with each word. "You've been lying to us for months, using Nathan, and for what? Some affair with this man?" He gestured toward the screen, where Daniel's name had been repeatedly flashing in the messages. The shock on Emily's face was almost comical. Her mind seemed to be racing, searching for an escape, any way to salvage her image. But her usual smooth charm was nowhere to be found. Her carefully crafted smile, the one that had charmed everyone in the room for years, was gone. In its place was something raw, something real, the panic of being caught. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way," Emily said, but even her words sounded hollow. Her excuses were unraveling faster than she could keep up. I was trying to finish school and things got complicated." She gestured at Nathan with a nervous laugh, as if he could somehow be made to look like the villain. "Nathan's been so focused on work, I needed someone to talk to, someone who understood the pressure. Daniel, uh, Daniel was just there for me." Nathan could feel his teeth grind together at her words. "Someone who understood the pressure?" he repeated, his voice dangerously calm. "You mean someone who understood how to make you feel good when you were running away from everything you promised me?" His eyes locked onto hers, daring her to deny it. "You used me, Emily. My money, my time, my sacrifices, everything I've given you for your dreams. You used it all to have your affair with him." He jabbed a finger toward the screen at the smug face of Daniel that flashed up briefly. Emily's eyes darted to Daniel's picture on the screen, then back to her family. "This isn't how it seemed. You don't understand." She paused, swallowing, her voice cracking. "It was a mistake. I didn't think it would go this far. Too late for that, Ben said suddenly, his voice cutting through the tension. His usual calm demeanor had cracked. Ben, who had always been the peacemaker, was no longer holding back. Mom, Dad, do you see it? She used Nathan. She used us. His eyes moved between his parents, then landed on Emily, who was shrinking under the weight of their gaze. This isn't some misunderstanding. This is betrayal. Nathan let out a slow breath, his hands balling into fists at his sides. His brother-in-law was right. There was no way to dress this up, no way to smooth it over. Emily had betrayed everyone in this room. Her husband, her family, and even herself. There was no more pretending, no more excuses. The truth was standing right in front of them, and Emily was being forced to face it, whether she liked it or not. Please, just let me explain, Emily said again, her voice now sounding more desperate. She turned to Nathan, pleading with him, but he wasn't moved. There was nothing left to explain. No more lies, Emily, Nathan said, his tone hard, the weight of everything finally settling in his chest. He had waited for this moment, for the day when she would be forced to confront her own actions. You made your choice. You chose him over me. You chose your own selfish desires over the life we were supposed to build together. Emily's face contorted with emotion, a mix of anger, shame, and panic. She glanced around at her family, hoping someone would come to her defense, but no one spoke. The silence in the room grew heavier, and Nathan could feel the walls closing in on her. She had no allies left, not even her parents, who had once been her staunchest supporters. This is the real Emily, isn't it? Nathan continued, his voice steady but cutting. The woman who uses everyone around her for her own gain? I've supported you for years, Emily. I've given you everything I had, and you repaid me with this. He motioned at the screen, at the messages, at the bank transfers. I hope you're proud of yourself. Emily finally broke, her composure shattered, her face flushed with humiliation as her family looked at her, their expressions now filled with a mix of anger and disappointment. Her father stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. I'm done with this. I can't look at you right now. Her mother, too, shook her head, her eyes filled with unshed tears. Oh, you heard us all, Emily. I don't know who you are anymore. As the room began to empty, one by one, Emily was left standing there, alone with the consequences of her actions. Daniel was nowhere to be found. Nathan knew he had already washed his hands of her. Now it was her turn to face the cold, unflinching truth of what she had done. She had no support left, no love, no safety net. The realization hit Emily like a ton of bricks, and in that silence, with everything she had worked so hard to hide laid bare, Nathan walked away. The next few days after the family dinner felt like a blur. Nathan didn't stay around to witness the fallout in full. He knew there would be yelling, tears, and desperate pleas for forgiveness, but none of it mattered to him anymore. His mind was made up, and so was his heart. Emily had pushed him to the edge, and now that he had exposed her for what she truly was, he wasn't looking back. He hadn't heard from Emily in the hours following the dinner. She had tried calling him repeatedly, but he ignored every one of her calls. When he checked his voicemail, there was a string of frantic messages, each one more desperate than the last. The first was a calm plea. Nathan, I need to talk. Please pick up. It's not what you think. By the third message, her voice was cracked with emotion. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I'm sorry. Please just let me explain. You have to understand. Nathan's jaw clenched as he listened to the voice on the other end of the line. She was still playing the victim, still trying to turn the tables, as if he were the one who had wronged her. But it didn't bother him anymore. There was no more sympathy for Emily. The next morning, as the sunlight filtered through the blinds of their bedroom, Nathan began packing his things. The weight of the decision he was making settled on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. But it felt right. It was time to leave. It wasn't the first time he had considered walking away from the marriage. For months now, he had felt a growing distance between them. Emily's lack of appreciation for his sacrifices, her increasing secretiveness, and her emotional detachment. It had all been building to this. The affair had been the last straw, but in truth, Nathan had already been grieving the loss of their relationship long before he found out about Daniel. As he folded his clothes, his mind wandered back to when things were better, back when they were just two young people in love, excited about the future. Emily had been full of ambition, with big dreams of becoming an architect, and Nathan had been the steady, reliable support she needed. He had believed in her, in them, but somewhere along the way, her ambitions had become entangled with selfishness. and the love. Now, he wasn't even sure he knew her anymore. Nathan's thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. He froze. His heart rate quickened. He knew who it was. "Open the door, Nathan, please." Emily's voice came through the thick wood of the door. "We need to talk. I'm begging you." Nathan stood still for a moment, considering. He could hear the tremor in her voice, the raw vulnerability that, in any other situation, might have tugged at his heart. But not now, not after everything she had done. He walked to the door and opened it. Emily stood there, her face pale, her hair disheveled. She looked nothing like the woman who had been so poised the night before, so sure of herself. Now she was a mess. A woman who had been stripped of her armor, left with nothing but the consequences of her choices. "Please," she said again, her voice cracking, "just listen to me." Nathan stepped aside, letting her in. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the years they had spent together, the moments of tenderness that still lingered like ghosts in his memory. Or maybe it was the faint glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, Emily would finally take responsibility for her actions. She sat down on the edge of their bed, wringing her hands. Her eyes were red and there were dark circles under them. She had clearly been up all night. Probably overwhelmed with shame and guilt, emotions Nathan had never thought she would be capable of feeling. "I never meant for things to go this far," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant to hurt you, Nathan. I swear, I was just so focused on my goals. I didn't know how to balance everything. And Daniel, he was there for me when I needed someone to talk to." Nathan folded his arms across his chest. "And that was enough for you to throw everything we had away?" His voice was cold, detached, the anger that had once burned so hot, now a distant, controlled ember. Emily's lip quivered. "I know I messed up. I do. But I never wanted to lose you. I love you, Nathan. I love you more than anything." The words were familiar. She had said them countless times before, often in moments of vulnerability when they had fought. But this time, they didn't hold the same weight. Nathan had heard those words from her, and yet they had never translated into actions that reflected them. What was love, after all, if it didn't come with honesty, loyalty, and respect? What was love if it was just a convenient tool to get what she wanted? "I loved you too," Nathan said quietly. "But love doesn't excuse betrayal. It doesn't excuse what you've done." He let out a slow breath, trying to contain the wave of emotion threatening to break through. "I sacrificed everything for you, Emily. I worked myself to the bone so you could go back to school. I never asked for anything in return except for your trust. But you threw that away the moment you decided to sleep with Daniel." Emmeline looked up at him, her eyes wide with shock. "I didn't sleep with him, Nathan. I didn't." Nathan cut her off with a raised hand. "Don't lie to me anymore. I know everything. I know about the money you sent him, the late-night texts, the phone calls. Don't try to pretend like this is anything other than what it is. You made your choice, and I'm done." Her face twisted in disbelief. "So that's it? Just like that? We're over?" Her voice was a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You're gonna just walk away? After everything we've been through?" Nathan met her gaze, his heart heavy but resolute. "Yes, I'm walking away. Because I'm done trying to fix something that was never broken to begin with. I gave you everything, and you threw it all away for some man who didn't even care about you. Do you really think I can just forget that?" Emily stood up suddenly, pacing around the room, her hands gripping her hair in frustration. You don't understand. You don't understand the pressure I was under. You don't understand how hard it is to live up to everyone's expectations, to be perfect all the time. Don't you dare try to play the victim," Nathan shot back, his voice sharp. "You've had every chance to make things right, but instead you've been living a lie." She stopped pacing and looked at him, her eyes filled with rage and hurt. "So, that's it, huh? You're just gonna leave me here with nothing?" Nathan didn't respond. He didn't have to. His silence was the answer she needed. Without another word, he picked up his bag, walked out the door, and left her there, alone with the mess she had created. The door clicked shut behind him, and as he stood outside in the cool air, a sense of finality washed over him. He had done what he needed to do. Now it was time to move on. Nathan walked away from Emily and their shattered marriage with his head held high, but the journey forward was not without its challenges. In the days following the confrontation, he found himself navigating a complex mix of emotions, anger, relief, and a strange sense of loss. Although he had made the choice to leave, The years they had spent together, the memories they had shared, and the dreams they had once built together lingered in his mind like ghosts. He knew that healing wouldn't be instantaneous. Betrayal leaves scars that time alone cannot erase, but Nathan was determined to reclaim his life and rebuild it on his own terms, the first steps toward freedom. Nathan began by disentangling himself from the remnants of his shared life with Emily. He contacted a lawyer, ensuring that the divorce proceedings would be swift and fair. He wanted no part of her lies or deceit to linger in his life. As he went through the legal paperwork, he found himself reliving some of their happiest moments. Those memories were bittersweet, a reminder of what he had fought so hard to preserve and what Emily had so carelessly discarded. He decided to sell their home. The house that had once been filled with laughter and warmth now felt hollow, a symbol of broken trust. Moving on meant leaving behind the physical reminders of his old life, so Nathan began packing his belongings and searching for a new place to start fresh. It was during one of these quiet evenings as he boxed up his life that Nathan stumbled upon an old photo album. He flipped through the pages, seeing snapshots of their wedding day, vacations, and holidays. His gaze lingered on one particular photo. Emily, laughing, her auburn hair shining in the sun, with Nathan standing beside her, his arm around her shoulders. He stared at the picture for a long time before finally closing the album and placing it in a box labeled Memories. It wasn't anger he felt in that moment. It was closure. He had given her everything he could, and she had thrown it away. Now, it was time for him to focus on the future, rebuilding and rediscovering. Nathan threw himself into work, picking up extra projects and taking on new challenges at the office. It was a way to distract himself, yes, but also a way to prove to himself, if no one else, that he was capable of standing on his own. His dedication didn't go unnoticed. Within months, he was offered a promotion, a role that came with a significant pay raise and new opportunities. Outside of work, Nathan began exploring the interests he had once set aside to support Emily. He joined a hiking group, rediscovering his love for the outdoors. He signed up for cooking classes, learning to prepare dishes he had always relied on Emily to make. With each new skill, each new experience, he felt a little more like himself. Perhaps even a better version of himself than he had been before. A chance encounter? One Saturday, Nathan was at a local coffee shop, his laptop open as he worked on a side project. The place was bustling with activity, the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. He barely noticed when someone asked if they could share his table. He was the only seat available in the crowded cafe. Sure, he said without looking up. Thanks, the woman replied, setting down her drink. She was in her early 30s with short, curly brown hair and an easy smile. Nathan glanced up briefly and nodded before returning to his screen. But as the minutes passed, they struck up a conversation. Her name was Claire, a freelance graphic designer who worked out of coffee shops around the city. Their talk started casually, discussions about work and the cafe's music selection, but quickly shifted to more personal topics. Nathan found himself laughing for the first time in weeks, the weight on his chest feeling a little lighter. By the time they parted ways, they had exchanged phone numbers. Nathan hadn't expected to meet someone so soon, but something about Claire's kindness and warmth made him feel hopeful. Nice consequences. Meanwhile, Emily's life had taken a sharp downturn. With Nathan's financial support gone and her family estranged, she struggled to maintain the lifestyle she had grown accustomed to. Daniel, her lover, had quickly lost interest once the truth came to light. She found herself alone, her reputation tarnished among her friends and family. Emily reached out to Nathan once, sending a long, apologetic email. She claimed she had made a terrible mistake, begged for forgiveness, and even hinted at reconciliation. Nathan read the email in its entirety, but he didn't respond. Her words no longer held any power over him. New chapter. Months later, Nathan stood on the balcony of his new apartment, looking out at the city skyline. A gentle breeze ruffled his hair as he sipped a glass of wine. He thought about how far he had come, how much he had grown since that fateful day. Claire joined him on the balcony, handing him a plate of the dinner they had cooked together. "Lost in thought?" she asked, smiling. "Just thinking about how different things are now," Nathan said. He turned to her, his expression softening. In a good way. She reached for his hand and squeezed it. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her glass. "To new beginnings," Nathan echoed, clinking his glass against hers. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Nathan felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, He was looking forward to finding out.